Hi, everyone. When the organizers invited me to come open for Dave McClure, who's getting ready back there, I just couldn't resist the opportunity. So, uncertainty. I think I picked this topic because I think it's something that everyone in this audience has really lived, and certainly it was something that we really struggled with. So I thought it'd be fun to just share some stories and some of the experiences I've had. So just quickly about me, I was founder and CEO of Pushlife, which was a mobile music company that sort of evolved into a commerce platform. We were acquired by Google, and since then I lead a number of mobile commerce initiatives at Google. I'm also a pretty active angel investor and advise a number of startups. So I think uncertainty is basically a way of life at startups. I think there's really just like two phases. There's like uncertainty and then extreme uncertainty. And there's a cute little curve on just like life at a startup. I think it's actually pretty accurate. At Pushlife, I think I spent most of my time thinking that I could get past it. You know, if only we close this funding round, or if only we close that customer deal or hire that engineer, like things will be, much smoother and more predictable. And I think I only realized towards the end that uncertainty is it's really just the norm, and there's no getting past it. You just need really great strategies for how to deal with it. And I think that really comes down to, I can kind of distill all of this down to like, it's about betting wisely when you need to bet, and not gambling on things that you don't really need to take risks on. So I'll share some examples of each of these things. So I really like betting on curves. I think that like curves, like where storage is going, for example, can really act like a North Star for a product or for a product vision. I think if you look at Gmail, like this is just a quintessential example of an entire product just based on one curve, which is storage will eventually be free, right? Or very, very, very close to free. And I think these kinds of curves give you the confidence to bet on something before it's really obvious and clear to the world that this is how things are going to be. And so if you just look at when Gmail launched, and when Google started working on something like this, it wasn't, I mean, storage was certainly not free, and it seemed kind of crazy to do something like this. But I think just Moore's law and the fact that these curves kind of hold true over time let them invest pretty confidently in something like this. And I mean, Gmail's a super successful product today that does a lot of things. But I think this was really the impetus of it all. So our North Star at Pushlife was that phones would kill single task products, right? So basically what I mean by that is the standalone MP3 player, the standalone digital camera, the standalone portable GPS. None of these things are going to exist as standalone things, just as sort of the PDA kind of was killed off by the phone, in the early 2000s. You can see so this wasn't that clear back in 2007. It was a bet that we took. But you can see, these are just some recent headlines. Basically, sales of all of these standalone products are just dramatically declining today. And I mean, I think you all know what phone sales are doing. But life isn't simple or easy. And so often I think the difficulty is there isn't just one curve or one trend going on. There's often multiple intersecting. And so while we were betting on the fact that phones would eventually, our bet was specifically on media. We wanted to build the most compelling media experience on phones, just so there was no need for you to have a standalone separate MP3 player or portable DVD player or whatever it was. Like, the phone was it. The challenge was we lived in a world of like of 90% market share feature phones, right? So you had these smartphones. They were there, and they were growing, but it was unclear. Like, is this going to be 5 years for when smartphones are really going to be like mainstream and the thing to build on, or and to our kind of shock, there was like, basically world record market share declines in all the feature phone makers from the period of like 2008 to 2011. So I mean, like, just Nokia falling 60% a year. It's just insane. So we were able to adapt to this, but we couldn't predict the timing here of. So while we were betting on phones, it was really hard to get the timing right of like, well, should we be all in on a smartphone platform, or how much do we invest on our feature phone product? So we adapted, but I think this was something this was a close call. Last kind of thing on bets. I think one of the hardest things as you kind of run a startup is it's so dynamic. Opportunities just continuously arise. You talk to your customers, they ask for new things, the market reacts to what you're doing, and it's really difficult to know which of these things are pivots or things worthwhile investing in, kind of hedges to your product, and which one of these things are just plain distractions. I don't think there's I wish there was kind of a general sort of answer or formula, but I think this is why CEOs get paid the dollars to kind of figure this out. But I can just share two stories when we were faced with some of this. So we started out really as a software company. We wanted to solve a really simple problem. The phones could play back media for a long time, right? Back from the early 2000s. The challenge was that all of your media was sitting on all your music and content was sitting in places like iTunes on your desktop. And there was just no easy way to get that on your phone. Like, the experience just sucked, right? So we wanted to solve that problem. Just make it super easy to get your content on your phone and then offer an amazing media consumption experience on your phone. And as we talked as we kind of pitched carriers and talked to sort of handset OEMs about this, their feedback was, well, this is great, the experience is really good, but we kind of already have this music store on the side, and it's kind of awkward for us to have two of these things. Like, would you guys consider just expanding your platform to do more than just media consumption? Could we actually sell content? Could you actually become a mobile music store and have kind of an integrated store, player experience? And we kind of thought about it for a while because this was a pretty big undertaking and kind of shift in direction for us. And in the end, we decided to do it. And just kind of going back to that North Star analogy, the reason we did it was we saw that one of the things that phones had against these standalone products was they were connected devices. You could actually do disruptive things on them, like not just consume media, but buy new stuff. They were plugged into the carrier billing system. So we really liked the fact that this was an experience we could build on a phone that you just couldn't really get on a standalone device, and was another another big thing in the right direction. So we did this. This was a really successful bet for us. We closed a number of different carrier deals because we went in this direction. And shortly after that, some of these same customers came back to us and said, well, it's great. You have this app. It's doing really well. Like, that's wonderful. But we have this separate thing called a WAP deck. I don't even know if that acronym means anything to you all, but like back in the day of feature phones, this was actually the interface of how most people bought content from their carriers, right? Pretty crappy. And this was all that could really run on low-powered feature phones. The thing is, this made up like 80% of their revenue because that was the handset base they had, right? So they were basically offering us what seemed at the time as a really lucrative opportunity. Build a different product, and basically if we had done just this one product for one carrier, we would have been a profitable company that year. And so it was very enticing. We really thought about this one hard, and in the end we actually didn't do it. And the reason for that is, again, it didn't align with our vision of where things were going. I mean, the whole smartphone, feature phone thing, even though the timing was unpredictable, it was pretty clear that this isn't where the world was going. So although it was a short-term revenue thing, I think in the long run, this would have been a really costly mistake for us. And if you actually just remember the previous graph, I think probably by the time we even deployed this thing, 12 months later, like there just wouldn't have been any revenue in it. So that's kind of, my experience on how we made some decisions around this. So switching gears a little bit, I think, when you need to bet, hopefully those were some factors to consider. I really think, the best bets are ones where you don't need to gamble. And I think with certainly with us, we were guilty of this, and a number of companies that I either work with or advise. I see them take a lot of these risks that I'm about to talk about, and I feel like most of them are unnecessary. I think the one thing that is really difficult for product-oriented founders like myself to separate is product vision from the user experience, right? I think that we often just muddle these things together into we need to own this experience like soup to nuts. I think the problem you're trying to solve is actually quite different than how people will interact with that product. And it's actually amazing to think that the number of products that are launched without any kind of usability testing whatsoever. And I don't mean doing a beta test and getting some written feedback. I mean actually just sitting there and watching how people use your product, right? Like a UX panel. And we didn't do much of this, right? We just tried to get our employees to use our product, friends and family, get solicit feedback in that way. And the more I kind of thought about it, the more I realized that this is just a seriously unnecessary gamble, because you can't prevent the inevitable. If people have trouble with your product or there are certain quirks around it, that's going to come out one way or another, right? If you put an app in an app store, you're just going to get blasted with negative feedback. So the thought that you wouldn't try and control that in a controlled setting ahead of time with a panel, it might cost you a couple $100 to have 7 or 8 people actually come in and watch them use your product, but it's a bit of a no-brainer. Now Google does a ton of this stuff, right? They really do. So this is definitely something that I've kind of just observed and learned. Google would never release a product without really seeing how users interact with it. And there's an interesting story on a UX blog that I read from time to time. The story is that there was a really large US retailer, top 25 retailer in the US. And they were having a conversion problem. People were adding stuff to their cart, and as they were trying to check out, they were seeing this massive drop-off. And so they called in the UX guys, and they ran the panel. And it turns out what people didn't like was when they created their cart and they were checking out and they were about to enter their information, the button said register, right? People just hated that word. They didn't want to register. They didn't want a relationship with that retailer. They just wanted to buy the thing that they had in the cart. And so they did some testing, and they simply changed the name of the button from register to continue. That was it, nothing else. Same number of fields on the page, same everything. That change resulted in $300 million of incremental revenue that year for that retailer, right? So the point I'm trying to make is that a lot of times these things aren't dramatic changes to your product. It's often the really little things, like your onboarding experience, what your buttons say, just things that you would never really be able to predict how users will kind of interact with them. And that's really the importance of really observing how people use it before you really get your product out there in the wild. Another really common problem that I've seen I hear about all the time is, just the hiring fires that startups always have, right? And tell me if this sounds familiar. The hiring strategy is basically, you start your hiring process when you need to hire, right? And this is a really big problem. When the chances that you can find a high quality engineer or employee that's kind of willing to take a chance at your startup at exactly the right time, on demand, right when, just because this is now the time where you need it because someone's left or you just closed a fundraising round, I mean, the chances are like near zero. And what ends up happening is you compromise on talent or you just overpay for it. And we struggled with this a lot. This was like, at any given point in time, I remember when our investors would ask, like, what's your burning issue right now? It was always hiring, right? Because we always kind of did this as an on-demand thing. And again, I think Google's really got this figured out. They actually monitor the number of interviews being done a week as one of the health metrics of the company, right? So they know that if they don't hit a certain number of interviews per week, then in the long run, they monitor the trend, and they know that means that we're going in a bad direction. So we need to kind of deploy the flaps and do more interviews. And so I think this is something really simple to do, even as a startup, right? Like, even when you're starting out, maybe this doesn't work when you're like 2 or 3 employees, but the moment you're something like 10, I think that you have to get into this cadence of doing regular weekly interviews, right? And making sure that even if it's like 2, right? But I think once you start doing that, you start building up a funnel of qualified employees that you can, of qualified candidates, I should say, that you could actually move on when you need this, right? The other problem that we had with hiring was we just had like it was me and like 1 or 2 other people that did all the interviewing, right? And this is another big problem, is that most interviewing is just not scalable at a startup. You basically take your top decision makers in the company, and then they just waste an entire week kind of doing a ton of interviews, and it's just this nightmare. I think that interviewing has to become a cultural thing that's pushed down to individuals. The entire company has to care about it, right? So just think about how much easier it would be if you had 10 employees and each one of them spent an hour a week doing interviews. All of a sudden you're doing 10 interviews a week with really no skin off anyone's back. So I think that getting into the right cadence here, and also making sure it's scalable is really the only way to kind of address this problem. I am running out of time here, so I had one last thing on communication. I think I will skip this and give you guys a reason to maybe come find me. I'm around the conference the rest of today and tomorrow, so if you want to talk about communication strategies, come find me.